Now, you guys by now have probably seen my hike through Georgia. You have seen my compilation of Georgia. But the question is, how hard is Georgia? Today, I'm going to tell you here on The Legend of Teardrop. We're going to discuss Georgia in depth. Let's go.
This is Teardrop, and welcome to New to the Wild.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again. I'm Teardrop JB Gunner, and today what we're going to be discussing is the state of Georgia. You guys have seen my compilation video. You've even seen my hike through there. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about a question, which is how hard is Georgia? Now, the reason I'm bringing this topic up, and I'm going to do it with each state that I hike, but with Georgia particularly, is I find it very interesting because there are a lot of hikers that will tell you that Georgia is probably the third hardest state outside of Maine and New Hampshire. But then you'll find other hikers that say, nah, it's not hard at all. And the reality is, it's probably not that hard, but what makes it one of the hardest states that you will come across on the Appalachian Trail is because it's your first state. Most of us that go onto the Appalachian Trail, we go out of shape. We're not ready. We're learning our gear. We're learning our routines. And so all of this learning process that you'll go through throughout your first essentially 80 miles of the Appalachian Trail makes it more difficult than what it really is. But let's go ahead and break it down. Let's get into it, and let's talk about how hard that Georgia is. Now, let's say you're going to start off with the approach trail. You've heard a lot of people say the approach trail is murder. The approach trail will hurt you. Let me make this very clear. The approach trail is one of the most beautiful things on the planet. And if you've never done any hiking, I would always advise you to go hike the approach trail, whether the miles count or not. And there's a reason. There's a saying within the community that if you cannot make the approach trail, you can't make the trail. Because by the end of the approach trail, you do got a genuine sample size, a genuine taste. Those 8.8 miles will teach you kind of what the Appalachian Trail is all about. Now, you do start off with a handicap with the approach trail because you hike up, I believe it's 620 stairs on the approach trail, and those pretty much knock your legs unconscious. Now, I will tell you now that the stairs at Amicalola State Park is the absolute hardest part of the approach trail. And it's funny because it's literally the very beginning of your hike. And so at that stage, when you get to the top or you get to the middle of these steps, chances are you're having that, oh shit, what did I get myself into type of question jumping into your mind. Now, once you get to the top of the falls, you view it, you walk up and you see the pop machines, soda machines, you feel like, okay, this ain't gonna be bad. Then you cross the road and you get into the actual blue blazes and the approach trail. Now is when shit gets real because now you're off into the woods. And with the approach trail, what will happen is you will essentially, your first mountain that I believe, real mountain that I believe you will come to is Frosty Mountain. And then you go to Woody Knob. Frosty Mountain, I remember being my first experience. I remember even Frosty Mountain or Woody Knob being a wake-up call for me because my legs were wobbly from the approach trail. I get to Woody Knob and Frosty Mountain, and I realize this shit is not walking in the woods. This is not going to be an easy go. Now, once you get done with that, the rest of the approach trail is extremely easy. You get to Black Gap Shelter, which I always recommend people do. Just do Springer Mountain in the morning. But Black Gap Shelter, you also get your first sample of the water on the Appalachian Trail. What I mean by that, at that moment, at Black Gap Shelter, when you go seek the water, you'll see how sometimes going to get water is a journey in itself. The Black Gap Shelter water is down a little bit. So you go down, you collect your water, then you look back up and realize you got to fucking come back up out of the water area. And that right there will teach you one of the best lessons on the trail. Is just because a water source is at a shelter doesn't mean it's easy to get to. It doesn't mean it's right there. And the truth of this is when you think your hike is over, it's not. Because you're going to have to go get that water, sometimes multiple times. Maybe at night once, maybe in the morning once. Depends on how much water you have, carrying capacity you have. The approach trail in itself is a lesson that you will learn. So, how hard is the approach trail? Well, since it's your first moments out on the trail, I'm going to tell you now the approach trail is pretty difficult, but at the same time, it's pretty eye opening. And I've hiked the thing 3 or 4 times, I think, and it does get easier for me. But I will tell you, there's nothing more demoralizing than when you get to the top of them stairs and your legs are wobbly and you look around and it says Springer Mountain, 7.8 miles from here. Fuck. You're already exhausted, you're already wobbly, and you still got to hike 8 miles. Ain't that a bitch? All right, so moving on, we get to Springer Mountain. Now, the day number one is typically for most people is Springer Mountain to Hawk Mountain. That is one of the easiest sections you will come across because what you get is the beautiful, easy area that is Three Forks. Now, don't get me wrong. Coming up out of Three Forks, when you head towards the falls, that's when you start noticing that this motherfucker rises. You go up. So, for the most part, from Springer to Three Forks is a piece of cake. You should be able to do that in 2 hours, easy. Now the problem is now you're coming up out of Three Forks, and once you come up out of Three Forks, essentially to the Long Creek Falls area, I believe that's what it's called. That is when you start, like I said, you're starting to realize, oh shit, we're going up. Hawk Mountain itself is a piece of cake. It's not even really a mountain. You kind of go on the side. I don't feel like it's a mountain. To me, Hawk Mountain is easy. For you, it may not be because it's your first technical named mountain. May kind of. So anyway, you get to Hawk Mountain Shelter and you say to yourself, this first day wasn't so bad. This was kind of easy. And you're right. But let me tell you now, don't let that first day make you think that's what Georgia is, because it's not. That was your easiest day in Georgia. Mark my words. So now what you're going to do is the next day you're going to start from Hawk Mountain. And let's just say your next destination is Gooch Mountain. That's only like 7.7 miles, but it's a tough 7.7 because you get to meet the bitch itself. What I consider the absolute hardest mountain in Georgia, maybe other than Kelly's Knob competes with it. But Sassafras itself, why is Sassafras so hard? Well, each time I hike it, I realize it gets a little easier. But for you, it will be hard because it is your first real mountain, your first difficult ascent. The first time you're like, oh shit. So you get up to Sassafras and you've accomplished something. And then guess what? You got to come right back down and do Justice Mountain. And Justice Mountain is Sassafras's little bitch. So don't worry about that. And the Justice Mountain area is beautiful. You cross the Justice Creek right there. I believe that's what it's called. When I crossed it the first few times, it was a little wooded thing that you had to cross, a little tree that fall. But currently, I don't know what they use. But that little area, but I will mark my words, if it's your first time hiking, when you start making your way to Gooch Shelter after Sassafras, you can't wait for it to be over. And what makes it even crazier is Gooch Mountain Shelter is kind of off into the woods, and you keep thinking you're going to walk up on it, and you never really do until you do. And that second day, that day number 2 will be at that moment where you decide yourself whether you're meant for this or not. And that's only 7.7 miles. Now, day 3, you're going to go, most people will go from Gooch to Blood. But you don't have to. You can stop at Lance Creek. But let's just say you're going to do the big thing. You're going to go like 12.5 or 13.5 to Neal's Gap or whatever. Let's just say you're going all the way to Neal's Gap. And you're going to go ahead and put in your first double-digit day. This will be the real test. Because when you come out of Gooch, you go up to Ramrock Mountain. Now, Gooch to Woody is a pretty easy section. I've done that little portion. I used to do it just for training. I lived right there, so I've done that thing like 20 times. You'll come. That's an easy little 3.5 miles. But then once you hit Woody Gap and you go up to Preaching Rock, now things are getting a little bit real. Preaching Rock is a nice climb up. It is hard for new people. I used to do it, like I said, just like the other one. I used to do it all the time because I lived right there. It was my training thing. Preaching Rock will be your first real view in Georgia. At this stage, it becomes difficult. Then you go to what's called Big Cedar Mountain, which is essentially the same thing as Preaching Rock. It's the same thing right there, big rock ledge. And then you'll come down into Lance Creek. and you'll have a pretty easy time till you get to the Gaddis Mountain Girard Gap area. You'll come into Girard Gap, and this is where you technically should have a bear canister um, if you're going to camp from Girard to Neals. Girard to Neals is relatively easy, but it's at the end of your day, so that is what makes it hard. Blood Mountain is the main event. Blood Mountain is overrated the way you're going to go up it. The way you're going to go up it, you should make it in a half hour straight up. Going down Blood Mountain is the bitch. Now, if you were southbounding up Blood Mountain, that would be a motherfucker. Blood Mountain is not all it's cracked up to be. It's a little overrated. But it is, I enjoy Blood Mountain every time I'm there. There's a certain mystique to it that I enjoy. And Blood Mountain, the summit of Blood Mountain is beyond amazing. And when you go down, there's so many views. All right, so you get to Neals Gap. Day number 3 is done. Your first double-digit day, you're pumped, you're geeked, or you're going home. Because, as they say, 25% of the people that attempt a through hike leave at Neals Gap. Now, coming up from Neals Gap, this is a hard. Ooh. Now you go in the back of Neals Gap, and you're going straight up to Leveling Mountain, then the Wolf Laurel Top, Cow Rock Mountain, and I will tell you, when you're leaving Neals Gap after you stayed for a night, maybe ate some pizza and had some beer, you're in for a surprise. The last time I did it, I think I've done it hungover as shit, and oh, no matter how many times I hike it, it's a tough one. So then what happens is you get to Poor Mountain, and what you're going to do in that day 4, is 11.5 miles to Low Gap Shelter. It is a long day. Every time I've ever got to Low Gap, it's been at nighttime. However, it's the first portion of the day that's difficult. That second portion of the day is relatively easy. It's kind of a small roller coaster, not that big. So if I was to rate these things from a 1 to 10, day 1, or 1 to 5 stars, and 5 being the hardest, 1 being the easiest. Day 1 from Springer to Hawk, I would give it a 1, essentially. Day 2, I would give that, particularly for your condition, a 3. Day 3, which includes Blood Mountain, 13 miles, I'm going to give that a 4. Just because you're hitting the hardest part at the end of your biggest day. Now, when it comes to from Neals to Low, I'm going to give that a 3. And it's only because you're coming out of it, like I said, you're coming out of Neals Gap, you're not in the best hiking condition that moment. And now you're hiking up a pretty tough start. But, so it'll be a long day from you because your chances are you'll leave Neals Gap a little bit later than you would leave a campsite. Okay, so from Low Gap, most people are going to go to, I'd say probably Blue Mountain Shelter, maybe. That's 9.7. But anyway, Blue Mountain Shelter, this is a pretty easy hike when you look at this day. Low Gap to Blue Mountain. Now, what makes Blue Mountain Shelter area hard is the boulders and rocks surrounding as you go up Blue Mountain. But this is actually an easy portion. It's really easy. So you're gonna have that day. You'll be able to kind of to breathe a little. And then once you leave Blue Mountain, you're then going to make your way to Trey Mountain, more than likely. Maybe it's time for a 5.7 or something of that nature. You may go a little past Trey. I highly doubt you're going to do 16.7 to get to Dix Creek. So maybe you stop at Trey Mountain Shelter and you take an easy day, only 6 miles. With that, and you may want to because you gotta bitch that day. As soon as you leave Blue Mountain, you come down into the Unicoi Gap. The minute you leave Unicoi Gap, you go up to what I consider the 3rd hardest ascension in Georgia, and that's Rocky Mountain. And Rocky Mountain also is never talked about. But Unicoi up to the top of Rocky feels like it never ends. You get up to Rocky Mountain, you get a little small view, not a whole lot. You come back down, and damn it, if you ain't met with the beginning of Trey Mountain, shit. Now we're getting up there because this little portion, so this portion for these 6 miles, 2 major mountains, Rocky Mountain, Trey Mountain, I'm going to give this day a 4. Because here's the truth about this section. From Unicoi to Dix Creek is the hardest 16 miles or so, a little bit more, that you'll do in the entire state of Georgia. This is a fact. You got Rocky Mountain, you have Trey Mountain, you have Kelly Knob. These mountains right here are literally, Tray Mountain by far is harder than Blood Mountain. Um, but Tray Mountain is also overrated. So that day, I'm going to give you a 4 because you got to pack in those two mountains in only a 6 mile stretch. I guess you could look at it as maybe a 3 just because it's not going to be a long day. So that day is a little bit difficult. You get to see the cheese factory there, all that. Now, you then are going to do 11 miles from Tray Mountain to Dix Creek Gap. This seems like an easy hike. It does, in theory. But you get to hiking, and it's relatively easy. You get Swagger Ridge, you get down there, you get Addis Gap, and then what happens? You hit Kelly's Knob. Kelly's Knob is maybe the hardest mountain in Georgia. Once again, this is towards the end of your day. You hit Kelly's Knob. Kelly's Knob, Sassafras, Rocky Mountain. I would say Kelly's Knob is number 1. That or Sassafras. It's right there, depending on your condition. But at that moment, Kelly's Knob goes straight up. You see the point in the book. It's not an easy thing. I do it for some reason every time I climb Kelly's Knob. It's in a fucking winter storm. Now you get to the bottom of Kelly's Knob. It's a deep gas shelter area, and then they'll tell you call us from Powell Mountain. That's what Dix Creek. That's what Top of Georgia will say. And you think to yourself, well, Powell Mountain doesn't look bad at all. It's not bad, but you're worn out from Kelly's Knob. Powell Mountain is it's got some false summits, and it's a little bit harder than people tell you. By no means is it harder than Blood or Tray or any of that shit. But what makes Powell impressive is that no one ever talks about it. It's at the very end, and it's not a big deal. Other than the fact it's at the end of an 11-mile hike, you always have to take that into consideration. So you get to Powell Mountain, and then you come on down into Dix Creek. You enjoy yourself. You go to Top of Georgia or Hiawassee. You get drunk. You feel yourself filled with all the burgers. Congratulate yourself because you have made it through another section. Now it's time to leave Top of Georgia. You're belly full, all of this, and you head on into North Carolina, towards North Carolina. Now that last day I was just talking about with Kelly's Knob, that 11 miles, I'm going to only give that a 3, honestly. Even though it involves Kelly's Knob, I'm only going to give it a 3 because the rest of that region isn't that difficult. It is difficult, but not, I've seen worse. Now, you leave Top of Georgia, and you're typically going to do 9 miles, I would say, if you're going to do Bly Gap. A little bit more if you're going to Muskrat Creek, but Bly Gap is essentially where the North Carolina border is. This day is actually pretty easy. Other than the initial climb out of Dix Creek, you do got Az Knob, you got Rocky Knob, you got some things there. But however, it's actually when you get, for me, when I got to the area where the border was supposed to be, because I'd been there so many times, I kept expecting to see it, and I didn't see it. And I'm like, where the fuck is this sign? Where is this border? And you're just ready to see North Carolina. You're excited. You want to get there. So this day is actually pretty easy. I'm going to give it a 2, maybe a 1.5 on the difficulty region. Because the truth of this is, as soon as you hit that North Carolina sign, rest assured, it's time to go up what used to be called Courthouse Bald. And this is where some shit gets real. But we'll talk about that in the How Hard Is North Carolina video. Because I used to believe Georgia was harder than North Carolina. And I guess in this video I kind of do too. But my mind may have been changed in 2017. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Because North Carolina, when you look at North Carolina, you kind of look at it and you think, well, to the Smokies and you're in Tennessee. No, because I don't think you really take into consideration how far North Carolina actually stretches. But anyways, so how hard is Georgia? The hardest mountains are Kelly's Knob, Sassafras, and Rocky Mountain. For a regular hiker, someone that hikes regularly, it's actually an easy state. Relatively easy. Maybe a 5. However, because you're brand new, it's your first state, for you, it will be a 7 or an 8. It will be one of your hardest states. Number one, there's not a lot of views. There's not a lot of views in Georgia, contrary to popular belief. Yes, you have Blood Mountain. Yes, you have Preaching Rock. And that's really it. There's not very many views in Georgia. The views don't really start until North Carolina. So you're walking in the woods. Unless you're there in the winter, where there's no vegetation, you're not going to see a lot. That's going to demoralize you. Everything in Georgia will demoralize you. And that is what makes it so difficult. So the answer to how hard is Georgia? If this is your first time on the Appalachian Trail, it is an eye-opener. And I give it an 8 out of 10. A 4 out of 5 stars. Because it is very hard to a hiking noob. Even if you've hiked elsewhere, if this is your first time on the Appalachian Trail, it's a shock. So, I currently live in Georgia. I hike Georgia all the time. I don't know anyone that's hiked Georgia more than me. I've hiked Georgia with this last one, I believe 10 or 11. Was this last one 10th time. 10th time. I'm actually about to hike it 11th time in October. Just for shits and giggles. So, it does get easier. I will tell you that. But for you people just getting started in 2018, take my word for it. It's not the easiest thing you'll see. Be prepared for a shock. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Obviously, I'll be doing how hard is North Carolina in my next video. Then I'm going to, of course, do how hard is Tennessee. Then you'll see all them. So, at least until I stopped. I'm going to keep doing these videos until my 2018 hike. Hope you guys enjoy the fact that I'm uploading consistently. Anyway, hope I'm bringing you the stuff that you want to see. Put in the comments section if there's something else you want to see. So, anyway, Georgia's a bitch. Good luck. Good luck.
Bye, bitches.